Hi DEVCOM 144 students, good day. I'm Mildred Moscoso of the Department of Educational Communication, College of Development Communication. You may call me Ma'am Nels. And you're watching a Video Learning System or VLS for DEVCOM 144. Now that you're about to start designing the message of your media-based learning system project in your laboratory classes, it's important to review the basic principles and techniques of visual design. The topics covered by this VLS were already discussed in your DEVCOM 40 class, but we think that a review of visual design is necessary so that you will be guided accordingly. This is the first part of the VLS on visual design, covering 3 topics. 1. Introduction to visual design. 2. Texts and typography. And 3. Illustrations. Now let's watch the first video.
Welcome to Unit 3 of our course. In this unit, we will explore the basic design and production techniques of educational communication media. This discussion plays an essential role in designing and developing instructional materials for our learning system. At the end of this lesson, we should be able to explain the importance of using visuals, enumerate the 5 steps in visual design process, discuss the 7 steps in planning visual communication, and differentiate the 5 visualization techniques. Before we proceed, please take note of the following reminders. Please be free to go back to any part of the lesson or pause if you feel that you need more time in processing our discussion. If there are parts that confuse you, please write them down and we'll discuss them with our lecture instructor. You can also post them in the discussion board of our LMS and let's discuss with our classmates. Let's have a short visualization exercise. Close your eyes for a moment and think of a cake. What does it look like? Does it look like any of these? Now, if someone asks you to visualize poverty, what comes to your mind? Does poverty look like any of these pictures? What we have done is actually a process of visualization. Simply defined, visualization is the process of translating a verbal idea into a pictorial or visual symbol. Visuals are very important. As instructional aids, they can make the learning of abstract concept more concrete. Let's have an example. Read this short explanation about parabola. Perhaps, most learners find it hard to understand concepts verbally, but if they are presented with images like this graph, chances are that they can grasp what the concept is about easily. They can also lessen misunderstanding. They help us in presenting our message in a logical manner and can increase learner retention. According to studies, lecture alone will probably result with 90% misinterpreted or forgotten and only 10% remembered, while with the use of visuals, learners will probably remember at least 50% of the lecture. Can you recall the visual materials used by your DEVCOM 40 lecturers in the previous units? Do they help you in recalling the concepts? The visual design process involves 5 steps: planning, message design, production, presentation, and evaluation. For this lesson, let's focus on the planning stage. Planning visual communication covers 7 steps. First, we need to determine the needs, problems, or constraints that visuals will help meet or solve. Then we analyze learner or audience characteristics. In this step, we determine the capabilities and limitations of our learners. These characteristics can help us in deciding what elements to put in our visual materials. The third step involves setting the objectives of our visual presentation. Then we assess alternative media that can help attain our objectives. After that, we are now ready to plan how to evaluate our visual materials and analyze resource requirements against availability. This step determines which resources are needed to design and produce the visual medium. Finally, we prepare our production plan. The production plan includes the budget requirements, work schedule, and work assignments. The last part of this lesson will discuss the 5 visualization techniques. These techniques can guide you in selecting the best and most appropriate elements to be included in our visual material. The first visualization technique is called identification. In this technique, we just show the actual product, service, or idea. Let's have this print ad as an example. What is this about? How do the texts and graphics deliver the message? As we can see, this print ad just shows the name of the product and the actual product itself, nothing else. This is how identification works. Here's another example. The second type of visualization technique is called characterization. This technique can be done in several ways. Unlike identification, which only shows the actual object, characterization describes the distinguishing detail of a product, service, or an idea. If you see a TV ad about laundry soaps comparing brand X, brand Y, that ad also uses characterization. It shows 2 or more objects with their contrasting qualities. Another way to show characterization is by presenting an extreme close-up shot, plan, layout, or cross-section diagram of an object, like in these posters displayed in restaurants. There may be no written description about the food that they serve, but based from the photographs displayed, you can describe how delicious the foods are. The third type of visualization technique is called prescription. If you see a print or TV ads that show steps or practice or tell you to do something, these ads are using the prescription technique. Look at this poster. What does it tell you? This poster asks you to fight tuberculosis and uses the prescription technique. Here's another example. Let us now move on with the fourth visualization technique, evaluation. This technique shows positive outcome of a recommended action or shows negative outcome of not adopting recommended action. Another way of showing evaluation is to present the situation before and after adoption. The fifth visualization technique is relation. This technique presents relationships of concepts using charts, graphs, and tables. In most cases, relation is used to present statistical or numerical data. Do you have any numerical data to be presented in your LSD? These are the 5 visualization techniques. Please take note that you may use one or maybe a combination of these techniques when you visualize. For instance, if you're going to design a flip chart for your learning system about newborn screening, you can use a combination of identification, prescription, and evaluation. If your learning system is about urban gardening, maybe you can use characterization and prescription, among other techniques. These ends our discussion for Lesson 1. We will have more activities when we meet in our class. We have enumerated the 5 steps in the visual design process, discussed the 7 steps in planning visual communication, and talked about the 5 visualization techniques. Have a good day!
Are you getting bored now? Okay, get 1/4 sheet of yellow paper. Well, I mean, just prepare one. The quiz will be answered later. Now, let's watch the second video.
Hello there! How are you doing today? Welcome to Lesson 2. For this lesson, we will discuss the elements of visual design. In general, there are 4 elements that we have to consider when designing a visual material. These are text, illustration, color, and layout. For today's lesson, let's focus first on text. At the end of this lesson, we should be able to enumerate the functions of text in a given visual media, identify the factors that affect legibility, and apply the tips on lettering. Let's now start our lesson. Text or lettering refers to the headline or verbal cues which carries the main message or reinforced message carried by the visual. Can you identify the functions of texts or words in visual materials? Let us examine the text in this poster. What do you observe? Texts in this poster are used to call attention to some parts of the visual. The contrast in color of the text versus the images and the background aims to direct us to specific parts of the visual. What do you think is the reason? Perhaps this is the most important element of the poster. That is why the primary focus is on the texts. Texts are primarily used to explain a concept. Imagine the PowerPoint presentations of your teachers if there are no text in it. Will it be as effective? Observe also the ads inside the fast food restaurants near the campus. You will notice that texts are used to describe their food. Now look at this poster. What do you think is the function of texts here? Texts are also used to contribute to a mood. A lot of movie posters are doing this. You can predict what the movie is all about by just looking at the font used. Finally, texts are used to give additional information. Look at this poster. Like in many visual materials, you will see a lot of details written in the smaller fonts which provide you information about the organization, its contact number, and email address among others. In order to perform these functions well, the text in our visual material should be easily seen, read, and understood. When designing texts for our visual materials, we should be guided by the general rule of lettering. That is to make our letters legible. Legibility is affected by the following factors: letter style, use of capital and lowercase letters, letter spacing, letter size, and contrast. Letter style basically refers to font or typeface. Do you have a favorite font that you usually use every time you submit a paper in class? In general, there are 5 families of letter. The first family is called the Gothic family, also known as block or sans serif letters. This family has a simple lettering style without serifs or small tail-like adornments with the uniform thickness of strokes. Arial, Century Gothic, and Gilt Sans belong to this family. Can you think of other fonts that belong to this group? The second family is called the Roman family, which is also known as serif letters. This family has letterings with thick and thin strokes. What do you think is the most common font that belongs to this group? You're probably thinking of Times New Roman. Aside from that, other examples include Garamond and Callisto. This style is usually used in newspapers, magazines, and other print media. The third family is called Old English. This style is elaborate in design. We can see this style in certificate titles. The fourth family is called Script. This style is similar to our handwriting. Examples of this style include brush script, Edwardian script, and Lucida handwriting. The last family is called decorative or modern. This family basically combines the style of any of the 4 families of letters mentioned earlier. This family shows letters with unconventional shapes. Can you identify some examples? Well, take a look at these fonts. The next factor that affects legibility is the use of capital and lowercase letters. Here are some tips on the use of proper casing of letters. First, set titles in capital letters. Second, use capital and lowercase letters if the title has more than 7 words. Third, use capital letters to highlight a concept. For subtitles, captions, or labels, combine capital and lowercase letters, like in this example. Let's take a look at these examples. Which of these 2 do you think is more legible and easier to read? When it comes to letter spacing, there are 2 ways to do this. We can use mechanical or optical spacing. Now, take a look at these 2 words. Can you see the difference in spacing? Mechanical spacing uses equal or even spacing between the letters, while optical spacing considers the shape of the letters in spacing. In most cases, optical spacing is more legible. Spacing also involves the spaces between words and between lines. Let's look at these examples and study the differences. The 4th factor that affects letter legibility is the letter size. This factor includes letter thickness, letter width, and letter height. Letter thickness can either be light, medium, or bold. Medium thickness is the most legible of all the 3. But this doesn't mean that we can't use light or bold anymore. We can still use these 2 if we want to emphasize a concept. Letter width, on the other hand, can either be condensed, normal, and expanded. Of these 3, normal is the most legible. However, we can still use condensed and expanded if we want to highlight a concept. In terms of letter height, for non-projected visuals, we can use this table as our guide. Notice the minimum recommended size of letter, which depends on how far or how near we're going to look at the letters. For projected visuals, use at least 3/8 inch or 24 points for titles. Meanwhile, we can use at least 1/4 inch high or 14 to 16 points for subtitle, caption, or label. Color and contrast also affect letter legibility. As a general rule, we should use light letters against a dark background or vice versa, so that the text can stand out better. In designing our texts, here are some tips that we can consider to make our letters legible. First, avoid fancy or too thin letters and use simple letter style. There are a lot of fonts available today. However, you should use only the fonts that you think your learners can easily read and understand. Let's take a look at these examples. Which of these do you think are the most legible? Remember, the fonts that belong to the Gothic and the Roman family are the most legible, but we can still use the other styles for headlines or if we want to emphasize a concept. As a reminder, we should be careful in choosing our fonts. Second, we should choose relatively short lines, at most 7 words in a headline or slogan. This will help our learners to process our message easily. Third, we should select appropriate letter style that will suit the message. Let's take a look at these titles. What do you see? The fourth tip in lettering is to use contrast to make letters more legible. It can be contrast in color, size, and style like in these examples. In terms of layout, we should follow the direction of reading in a culture. We should avoid circular or vertical patterns, which are also known as the pain in the neck layouts. Use slightly tilting letters to denote action, like in these examples. Now here are more tips in using words effectively. First, keep words to a minimum. Remember that we are designing visuals for viewing and not for reading. Perhaps we can use other elements such as illustrations, photographs, charts, and graphs to convey the message instead of putting a lot of words. Second, present correct or accurate information. Third, use correct word syntax. This includes the correct use of grammar, spelling, punctuation, and word usage. Fourth, put words together in an engaging manner. Use a slogan or a verse, but make phrasing original. Fifth, use simple and correct language. And finally, as we have mentioned a while ago, design visuals for viewing and not for reading. For example, when you are doing slide presentation, whether in PowerPoint, Keynote, or Prezi, we should have only one idea per slide. No more than 6 items in the next slide, no more than 10 items of text, and as much as possible, 6 to 7 words per line. This will help our learners to process our information easily. In summary, this lesson covered essential information that we have to consider in text and lettering. We will have more discussions and exciting learning activities in our class. Have a good day.
Okay, now can you tell me what your favorite typeface is? Is it Times New Roman, Comic Sans, Helvetica? What do you think fits your personality? Maybe you can make your own typeface. Okay, now it's time to watch the next video. But be sure to prepare your pens now because the quiz questions will be given soon.
After our lesson on texts, let's now talk about the second element of visual design. At the end of this lesson, we should be able to identify the types of illustrations and apply the guidelines on using visual cues. Please be free to go back to any part of the lesson or pause if you feel that you need more time in processing our discussion. If there are parts that confuse you, please write them down and we'll discuss them with our lecture instructor. You can also post them in the discussion board for our LMS and let's discuss with our classmates. In general, there are 6 basic types of illustrations. These types range in appearance from abstract to realistic. Let's discuss them one by one. The first type of illustration is called stick figure. Of all the types, perhaps this is the easiest to draw since this lacks details. Remember the first images that you drew when you were kids? In simple terms, a stick figure is a simple line drawing that shows facial expressions, positions, motions, or actions. The second type of illustration is called a humanized drawing. This type gives human attributes to animals and inanimate objects. We can do humanized illustrations by adding human features such as eyes, nose, arms, or feet to an object. The third type of illustration is called a cartoon or cartoonized drawing. This illustration uses satire, caricature, or exaggeration to tell a story about a person, group, or situation. Have you tried having a cartoonized version of yourself? Like this. And this. The fourth type of illustration is called a stylized drawing. This type shows graphical representations of persons, objects, and things. It basically takes advantage of geometric shapes, slightly distorting the image. The fifth type of illustration is the closest to reality. This is called realistic illustration. This type shows the details of the thing it represents. Look at this example. This is a realistic drawing of a cat. It has shading and emphasizes texture. Now look at these illustrations. Can you understand the meaning of the message that they would like to convey? These are examples of symbolic illustrations. A symbolic illustration can actually be any of the illustration mentioned earlier but has learned meanings. It is commonly understood by a specific group of people. For example, when you see a heart, what message do you think does it convey? Yes, most of the time, we think of love. When designing a communication material, as much as possible, show only one illustration to represent a concept, message, or idea. Always bear in mind the advantages and disadvantages of the types of illustrations. Each form has specific uses depending on the message that you would like to convey. Use realistic illustrations for straightforward instructions. In addition, illustration should be related to your message. Sometimes, instructional materials with illustrations that have nothing to do with the message just confuse the viewers. Aside from illustrations, other visual cues or graphics such as charts, graphs, diagram, and photograph can be used to explain the concept. As mentioned last time, we design visual materials for viewing and not for reading, and charts, graphs, and diagrams can help us convey our message with less text. When using photographs, use only properly exposed photograph. If it is too dark or too bright, don't use it. Another important guideline is to consider your audience's visual literacy and culture. We have always been saying that the #1 rule of communication is to know your audience. Understanding your visual literacy can help you in selecting the most appropriate visual cues for your message. Finally, never sacrifice accuracy or correctness of picture or illustration for artistic value. Limit editing of photos, especially if you're going to use them in presenting scientific information. In summary, this lesson covered the 6 types of illustrations and provided useful tips on using illustrations and other visual cues. We'll have more discussions and exciting learning activities in our class. Have a good day.
That's really cool. I honestly admire people who make amazing illustrations. That's because I can only do a little better than stick figures. What about you? Okay, now that you have your pen and paper with you, answer this quiz. 1. Identify the letter style. Can we use this letter style for the body text of a print learning module? 2. What visualization technique was used in this e-poster? Why do you think so? 3. When do we use symbolic illustrations? way, watch out for the second part of the VLS on visual design. I hope that now you are better prepared to produce your MVLS. Again, this is Mom Nels.